White applicants receive 36% more callbacks than equally qualified African Americans and 24% more callbacks than Latinos on average. While employers are responsible for following applicable anti-discrimination laws and critiquing their hiring processes to remove biases, there are steps that you can take that'll help reduce potential bias for employers. In today's workshop, we'll discuss types of bias you may encounter and ways to empower yourself during your job search. Today's learning objectives. Understand bias and why it impacts the hiring process. Find ways to identify inclusive workplaces and prepare to handle situations where your job search, you might encounter bias. All right, well, without further ado, I'd love to get you to meet our panelists for today. My name is Dane Browner. I work here at Indeed, and I'm our Global Recruiting Strategy Manager, sitting on our Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging team. I'm gonna kick it over to Kenneth.
Dane, thank you so very much for kicking it over. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. My name is Kenneth L. Johnson. I'm president of the Harlem, New York-based diversity recruitment firm, East Coast Executives, also a consultant for the New York Urban League and host of the National Urban League Digital Career Success Series. Thank you for having me today.
Kenneth, so glad to have you. Really excited to hear from you today. Thank you again. Stacey, how about you?
Thank you, Dane. I'm Stacey Lewis. I have the honor to serve as the Chief HR Officer for the Port of Long Beach, the second largest port in the country. I'm also the CEO and Chief Influencer of HR Interrupted. So happy to be here with you guys today.
Stacey, thank you so much. Really glad to have you. And last but certainly not least, Gabrielle.
Hi, everyone. Gabrielle Gambrell. I'm a marketing and communications consultant, and I'm also a graduate adjunct professor at NYU, where I teach courses in marketing and communications. I'm really excited to be with you guys today. Great afternoon in store.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Thank you, panelists, so much for your time and your commitment today and the insights that you're going to share. Very excited to have all three of you on. According to a 2019 diversity and inclusion study by Indeed's sister company, Glassdoor, 42% of US job seekers reported having experienced or witnessed racism in the workplace. Stacey, I'm going to come to you first. Can you tell me about a time when maybe race impacted your hiring experience or something that you saw?
Thank you, Dane. Absolutely. I've been in the HR game for about 35 years, and I've seen the highs and the lows, but specifically, me personally, a while ago, about 20 years ago, I interviewed for a position. And during the interview process, the hiring manager didn't even go to the first question because he had made a decision that I was not the candidate based solely on how I look. And I've never, ever forgotten that experience. That's why I'm so passionate in this space.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. Kenneth, maybe you could add in there as well.
Yeah, sure. I believe it definitely had an impact on my career. Initially, when I was after graduating college, and seeking out opportunities, I really believed that race was taking place, or racism was taking place in some of the hiring decisions because I just couldn't find opportunities. But within that framework, I was able to kind of just persevere and really set out to have an impact in workplace diversity. And that's kind of brought me here today, where I assist companies that are interested and committed to adding diverse talent to their recruitment pipelines.
Yeah, you've done some pretty amazing work. I can't wait to hear a little bit more about that as you go on, but thank you so much. Appreciate you sharing that. Gabrielle, anything that you could add in?
Yes, absolutely. As I search for companies that I want to work for me, it is really important that I see individuals that look like me. Race has significantly impacted my job search. When I search for a company, I'm looking for other Black executives. What does the C-suite look like? Literally, the website of the company. Do I see myself reflected? And there's been many of times where I was really interested in a role in a company, but I did not see myself reflected, and that impacted me even continuing my search with them.
Yeah, that's so true. And I appreciate you pointing out some of the things that you look for yourself in a job search. That's huge. And I'm sure we'll see some more on that later. Well, let's get started into some of our topics for today. What is bias and why does it impact hiring? Gabrielle, I'll give it to you.
Thank you, Dane. So we're going to talk about several different types of bias, and I'm sure as we discuss them, you may be able to identify with some. So going to our first, Unconscious bias. This is really the popular bias that you hear about, where people will literally make assumptions about you unconsciously, not even knowing, not even acknowledging that they're being biased in any way. So, for instance, based on your name on a resume, based on your appearance, making judgments based on that, like, oh, you're African American or you're Black. I know your culture. I know how you operate. I know how you bring yourself to work, your whole self to work. And so it's just unfair. And people may not even, the emphasis here is unconscious. You don't even know that you're doing it. You're making this bias, this judgment purely because of things that are wired, or things that we've unfortunately learned. Systemic bias, driven by how a process or institution was designed. So this may be, I'm a Harvard alum, and I want to hire other Harvard alums. When I look at applicants, I want to look at applicants from my alma mater. Please let me see Harvard alums. I'm really impressed with all the other alums I've seen. We have the same morals, we have the same work ethic. And so I have this system in place that I use in the hiring process, which obviously is forgoing a lot of highly qualified candidates from the pool. Affinity bias, somewhat similar. You belong to a specific group. You may belong to a sorority, a fraternity. You may be a part of a nonprofit group. You may be on the same board. You may be from the same community. There's a tendency to hire people who you feel comfortable with, people who you have an affinity with. And that could be really troublesome because that great candidate may not have your same background. They may be from a different culture. And moreover, they may be able to bring their unique culture to amplify your workspace, your culture, your company, if given the opportunity. Conformity bias, tendency to have to behave like those and want to be around the same type of people. So hiring people that agree with you. I recently was having a conversation with an executive recruiter for a leading company. And the executive recruiter said to me, what would you do if you're at the board table and everyone else agrees and you disagree? And I said, well, if I have a seat at the table, I'm going to take advantage. I'm going to let my opinion be known. I am there for a reason. I want to bring my whole self. I want to let people know what I think and how I feel. Some individuals don't want to hire people who won't agree with the masses. Some people are looking for you to just say, okay, well, the greater good, I'm going to go along with that. And based on that, they make decisions on your candidacy at that company. Confirmation bias. This is really unfortunate. It's somewhat what Stacey said, where people had already made a judgment about her abilities. People have already made a judgment about who you are. Perhaps it's your name. Perhaps you have an ethnic name. Perhaps you have a unique cultural background. Your address is on your resume. People are judging you for the school you attended. Oh, I know people that have attended that college, and this is my opinion of them. And so it is making a bias and developing biases to prove what they already think about you. So for instance, I'm a woman, I love sports, love sports. Someone may assume because I'm a woman that I'm not qualified to work in the sports field. They may even assume because I was not a collegiate athlete, how are you coming into a sports role? So based on that, they will strategically ask questions to validate that idea that I'm not qualified or that I'm not totally into sports. The same can be done for music. Let's say you want to work in the music industry. Let's say you are a Caucasian person. Let's say you're a white person and you're applying for a hip hop role. The interviewer may make assumptions that you don't love hip hop simply because of your race. Those biases where people are already making judgments. They're already judging you and they just want to confirm. They want to make a confirmation of what they think about you, falls into this category.
Gabrielle, if I could just jump in on that, and I really appreciate, your dialogue about that. In the example that I used, it was very obvious that this hiring manager had some type of a preconceived notion about people of color, because when I he did not even allow me to sit down, right? He just
Wow.
turned and told me, we here at XYZ company pride ourselves on who we put in front of our clients. And so I appreciate you really diving into what this looks like and the confirmation bias, because it happens all the time in various factions. And I'll never forget that. So thank you for amplifying that space in there.
Yes, yes. Thank you for sharing, Stacey.
Yeah, no, thank you both for adding in there. And what we saw even from our poll is this isn't something that's just in one small forum, right? This is something that we see run rampant, unfortunately. So thank you, Gabrielle, so much for sharing that with us and talking us through those biases.
Yes.
What can I do about it as a job applicant? Kenneth, take it away. Get us going. Let us know what we can actually do ourselves.
Sure. Definitely. It's really interesting. You know, the example that Stacey laid out, you start to wonder, like, what could she have done? And there wasn't much that she could do in that particular scenario, other than just continue to try to present herself as a viable candidate, if she actually was even interested after that, right? So what you want to do going into pursuing opportunities is make your resume shine, right? And it starts with your summary, Dane. The professional summary, it really is the top part of your resume. We call it the top third of the resume. You know, you had mentioned your sister company, Glassdoor, but they did a survey with the ladders, and they found out that the average recruitment manager or recruiter spends about 8 to 16 seconds looking at resumes. So you don't have a lot of time. So you really want to catch people at the professional summary. And that's where you want to really list quantifiable, actionable items where you show how you've added value. Please remember in your summary, it's really not as much about you as it is about how you can add value to the organization. And the way you do that is through an ATS-friendly format, of course, right? And getting this across. ATS stands for Applicant Tracking System. That's really just the online interface that you enter your information in when you're applying for a job. And what they mean by ATS-friendly format, I won't completely get into that, but there are a ton of resources on the Indeed site that allows you to look at templates and look at resumes that are very much applicant tracking system friendly. You definitely want to have keywords in your resume, and the keywords should be relevant according to the position description. You want to look at the job description, and in the past, I used to tell people to kind of highlight through the things that they've done and make sure that information ends up on your resume. But you can use a word cloud that you can find through just a standard search for word clouds, and you can copy and paste the position description into the word cloud, and it'll produce a list of keywords for you that are relevant in that particular job description. Make sure those words find their way onto your resume. The next part to focus in on is skills and certifications. This is kind of where you can kind of add impact. You know, especially now in the COVID-19 landscape, people want to know that you're a continuous learner, that you continue to try to find ways to not only upskill yourself, but also to add, you know, some certifications that may make you a more viable candidate. So look for some of the online certification programs and things of that nature. There's quite a few of them out here that will allow you to solidify your case as a viable candidate, and maybe even kind of knock some of those biases out just by proving that you are the best candidate for the opportunity. And then community involvement has always been important, but really extremely important now is we kind of become more conscious of who we are and who we're bringing to work, right? Community involvement, social justice issues. These things can add value to your resume as companies tend to really connect some of their own organizational brands to the brands of their employees, right? So with that being said, I think community involvement and sharing that on your resume is a really important thing to do. You know what, let me get into developing your network. So you want to develop your network. You do that through professional associations. No matter what it is that you do professionally, I promise you there's an association of individuals that are doing the same work. And you can kind of connect in, even through LinkedIn groups and things of that nature, to kind of solidify yourself in your field and kind of communicate and be involved with subject matter experts. These come through all types of online communities. And I even mean your social communities. Ton of people providing great content through their social media feeds. And this content can be used as kind of a blueprint on how to network and connect, because your networking, the process to your networking is to seek referrals. As you go through some of these online communities and these professional associations, add value. Don't always ask for things. Also ask how you can support other individuals. And believe me, that will lead to sound and solid referrals to some other organizations. So what we're looking for is inclusive employers, right? As you're seeking out these referrals, you can find referrals from inclusive employers. Now, of course, you're going to ask, how can we find out how inclusive an actual organization is? And if you look at this, Indeed even offers an inclusive scale that they're rating companies on based on feedback they're receiving from the individuals that work with the organization. They're rating their own organization on how inclusive the environment is. You can look at company websites. Gabrielle had mentioned that she looks at the website, looks at the C-suite to see if there are individuals there that look like her. That's a great way to kind of look at a company internally, and also through their social media feeds. What are they posting about? What stories are they sharing? Companies understand now that their brand is really important and they need to share unique, diverse stories about not only their organization, but the employees that make that organization up. And then, of course, again, the Indeed company pages, an unlimited wealth of information for those looking to not only navigate hiring biases, but to find organizations that are worthy of their candidacy. If you follow these tools, I think you'll be headed in the right direction. So there's some things you want to be on the lookout for, right? Tokenism, emphasis on culture fit, lack of diversity in the interviewers themselves. All of these things are things that you want to be mindful of as you navigate your process.
Thanks, Kenneth. Now we're talking about being on the lookout and things that we want to look at. So Stacey, get us going here.
So again, I think Kenneth, you're absolutely right. You want to be on the lookout for tokenism. And what is tokenism? It is the practice of making a symbolic hiring of maybe a person of color to give the illusion, right, that it is an equitable workspace, right? So as you are in your job search, and Kenneth did a wonderful job in laying that foundation of your resume and what you're looking for, but really be an active job seeker, right? Be an active job seeker. So be on the lookout that you're not going to be the only one. I love when Gabrielle said, she looks at that to make sure that I'm not going to be the one. There's a lot of conversation these days around equity and inclusion, diversity and belonging. Make sure that you're not going to be the first, right? See if there's a lot of emphasis around cultural fit. I'm going to tell you, I am a hiring manager, and in our organization, I don't allow them to use the word fit. A lot is hidden behind that word fit. So be on the lookout. And if you hear that, or if there's a lot of emphasis on the organization that you're pursuing, make sure in the interview process that you address that and you identify what do they mean by cultural fit. And then just as Gabrielle said, if there's a lack of diversity for the interviewers, right? Because representation equals authenticity, right? And so we want to give our whole selves in the workplace, but we want to make sure that those individuals, that we are represented, right? So make sure that you're looking out for these things as you're going through the process. And then be authentic. Communicate the value of diversity for you. So whether you're saying coming into the organization that you're helping this organization be reflective of the community you serve, whether you speak multiple languages and you can add that to the progressiveness of the organization, or the one that I really love that often gets overlooked is come in with new ideas and showcase the benefit of diverse thinking. See, what we often do is we think of, and I'm going to probably say from the candidate's perspective, or applicant, the diversity is just, it's a race-based. That's important. But I did a survey not too long ago with an organization, and the employees in the organization said the number one area that diversity was lacking in this company was diversity of thinking. And so what they went on to say, Kenneth, was everybody in the organization was a yes person, right? And so that really stood out to the organization. So again, when you're thinking about that, really come in with new ideas of how you're going to change the landscape and embrace that position.
Stacey, I just want to come in on that diversity of thinking and diversity of thought. It's been really interesting. We're an executive search firm here at East Coast Executives, and companies have came to us and asked us to kind of look for that in our recruitment processes, right? And that's kind of new. That's been about the last 3 years. People have reached out wanting us to factor in diversity of thought.
You talked about culture fit, right? So when we think about replacements for that sort of an interview, fit means fitting in, right? And we're not necessarily looking for people to fit in per se. So can you expand on that a little bit to say more about what should we do? Is it maybe company values? Is that the interview that maybe we use to replace? Like, how does this person add value to the company, or what does that look like?
Absolutely. Great question, Dane. What I'm looking for as a hiring manager, and what I would encourage everyone to say is, how did your personal and your professional background align with the mission, visions, and values of the organization? Again, we don't want to really talk about this, but fit is so broad. When you say a person does not fit, right? There's so much that can come behind that. But then when you ask, or applicant asks, or candidate asks, what was it? Let's say they're not hired, Dane. What was it about me personally and professional that did not align with the organization's mission and value? That now you have a lot of deeper digging that you have in deciding why this person may not be the candidate of choice. And so I really want to encourage the viewers today to be active participants in the hiring process. When you are interviewing, and I know we're going to go over some questions, it's not just the organization that's vetting you, and Kenneth did a wonderful job, but it's also, you're looking for the organization, they're looking to see if you're a person, but you're also seeing if that's where you want to be. And so it's really important that you're not passive in this process, especially with relates to your thoughts on diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, no, I love that. And Gabrielle, maybe you can tie this back when we think about the biases that you brought up before. Well, especially looking at the university landscape as well. Can you maybe tie that all in for us?
Yeah, I think that's something that candidates, and I know it's easier said than done. I think there's power that candidates have in that when there is these conversations of a cultural fit, or when there's conversations about diversity of thought and belonging, candidates should, in the same respect, say, is this the right place for me? We should not have to shrink ourselves, or we should not have to be someone we're not, because what happens is if we do end up getting that role and it is not the best for us, then long-term, there's not going to be success. So I think that's really an important aspect in the interview process, that the candidate, though it's difficult to identify, the candidate is interviewing the job as well. Is this going to be best for me? Is this going to be a place where I'm going to be elevated? Is this a place where my ideas are going to be championed? And so through this process, though I completely recognize it is difficult because you're trying to impress, you're trying to put your best foot forward, and you're trying to convey why you are qualified in everything that's on your resume. You're trying to convey, and now especially in this virtual world, over a phone call or over Zoom, you're really trying to impress the hiring manager. But pay attention to how they ask questions. Pay attention to their responses, because you also want to make sure that you are being set up for success for yourself. Is this a place I truly want to be? And I know that's hard depending on your situation, but I think that's important to mention as well.
You're right. The interview for so long has been thought of a one-way, it's been a one-way dialogue. If the people watching today get nothing away from our conversation, which I want them to know it is a conversation. And you are right, depending on where you are, it could be a little daunting, but it is a conversation. And when you approach it from that perspective, we as the hiring managers, we see that. And so ask questions in the interview, especially regarding around diversity and inclusion. And here's some examples that we gave. But the one that I love, and the one that I absolutely love, is how has leadership amplified their commitment and voice around this diversity and inclusion? First of all, when you ask that question as an applicant, it demonstrates to me as a hiring manager that you know that this diversity and inclusion really starts from the top down. So now, even in just that question, you've demonstrated that you are a well-informed applicant, right? I love when you say, listen to the questions that we're asking. We are always assessing you every way in the process. So make sure you ask questions, especially if this is important to you. What do you do for your employee resources group? What benefits do you have? How do you promote? Again, by me being the hiring manager, I'm gonna say, okay, this is really important to Gabrielle. Even when you ask the questions, right? One of the things that I want you also to think about is to be prepared for the responses. And whether we know it or not, Dane, people are still asking inappropriate questions in the interviews. And often that is tied back to those biases that Gabrielle talked about, the confirmation biases, the unconscious biases, all those things. So how do you respond to that, right? Again, when you think of the interview as a conversation, you may not be caught off guard as much when you get the question, an inappropriate question. And your response should always refer back to the job. Can you clarify how that relates to this role, right? Or, and I love this response. One of the great things about my background is that I have a track record of successfully working with diverse groups. And I'm confident that I will succeed in this role because of my skills and experience. That in and of itself, again, will let us know that you are a well-informed candidate, right, for the role. Especially, and just real quick, especially if you're pursuing a leadership role, oftentimes you're going to have to work around these challenges. And so we want to know how you think on your feet. I'm not saying the questions are appropriate that they should ask, but your responses, when you bring it back to the workforce or bring it back to the job, then that demonstrates, right, your next level moving forward. So always be prepared.
For sure. Now, Stacey, I'm going to ask you to think on your feet. When it comes to preparing for these inappropriate questions, would you say that we should role play, or what do you think that we should be doing to make sure that we're preparing for those ourselves? Is it role playing with a friend, or maybe give some tips for how you want our audience to prepare?
Thank you, Dane. Well, the first thing I want you to do is when you are going into the interview, tell yourself it may happen. See, what happens is we're not prepared because we think, oh my gosh, this is the year 2021. No one asks inappropriate questions. And I'm sure Kenneth can give you quite a bit of examples of where people are answering questions. So be prepared. The next thing is you can role play with someone. Hey, if they ask this question, how should I respond? But the other thing to do is when you hear that question in the interview, pause. Silence is a beautiful answer, right? Because what will happen, and use the silence to your benefit, right? Because what you want to do in that moment is you want to gather your thoughts, right? You want to remember the Indeed webinar that you attended, right? When Stacey, Gabrielle, and Kenneth said, pause, relax, and then go back into, you know what? That's a really good question. Well, again, one of the great things, and actually you can say, and you can even, that's an interesting question. But one of the things I want to share with you, I love this, my background, I have a proven track record. Bring it back to the job that you're applying for. So the two biggest tips are come in being prepared that it may happen. And when you hear it, pause, gather your thoughts. Remember, you're in an interview and a conversation, right? And then respond accordingly. And then finally, make a decision if that's an organization that aligns with your personal and professional mission and vision.
Stacey, I want to come in because I love that answer. I think that's the exact right answer. Pause and then kind of refocus back in, right? And if you're using the foundation to your interviewing process, right? Say you're using the STAR technique, right? Stay focused on the situation, the task, the action, the result, right?
Right.
Stay in line with that line of answering and kind of move the interview forward. To your point, that moment of silence and then your professionalism and your ability to kind of focus back in on what this interview is all about by sticking to your foundational interview techniques will be worth a lot in that process as they come to their final decision making. Don't think that people don't interview you with the purpose of getting you off of your lane, right? They want to throw things out to see how you'll actually respond to certain situations, because that may be the situation you're in with their customer.
I think that's fantastic, right? And I think that's a huge win that we can all think about throughout the interview process, but especially with questions that may be inappropriate or ones that we weren't expecting. To pause, take the time to really reset, gather our thoughts, and maybe not just say the first thing that comes to mind. So I think that is terrific advice that we can definitely put into practice pretty quickly. So thank you. All right. Now we've gone through a lot in a real quick fashion here. So talking about understanding bias, right? We talked about a bunch of different types of bias and what they actually look like. Think about how we can actually mitigate that bias, right? We learned a lot about that today. Make your resume shine. Think about what you can do to really stand out. In the environment that we're in right now, maybe that's about developing your network, right? Working on those referrals like Kenneth talked about. We're looking for inclusive employers. Are we looking at the makeup of the companies in which we're looking to apply to and where we can actually push forward and we can make strides ourselves? Can we actually see ourselves there versus just searching for a job? You know, oftentimes if we take the time to prepare and understand the companies that we're going to, we wouldn't have to job hop, right? We wouldn't have to look at so many different opportunities if we do our homework on the front end. Be on the lookout for barriers to belonging. Spending time understanding about how people actually enjoy the environment they're in, right? It's not just about fitting in, as we learned and we talked about today, right? It's not about fitting in with everybody else. It's what do we bring to the table? What's the value that we bring to the table? Asking questions in the interview. We cannot forget that just because we're interviewing for a job, that also means we're interviewing, right? We're interviewing that company ourselves. If it's somewhere that we want to work, is this an opportunity we want to pursue? Is it what's going to be best for you? Communicate the value of diversity. When we think about the things that we're valuing, right? When we think about the number of people that responded to our poll today and talked about things that they saw in the workplace, right? And the discrimination that they saw. What's the value? What's the commitment that this company has for you on diversity? Does that meet your values and the things in which you're looking for? And last, but certainly not least, let's make sure that we're prepared. We're prepared for inappropriate questions, right? And when we get those inappropriate questions and questions that we're not necessarily prepared for, what are we going to do, right? Let's remember that pause and our opportunity that we don't have to just say the first thing that comes to our mind. We can actually spend time and give a thoughtful response. And as someone, and as our panel of all of us will have been hiring managers, we want thoughtful answers, right? Take the time, and gathering your thoughts and really giving something meaningful is huge and very important. Thank you, panelists, for all the things that you were able to share today. We have a lot of questions that have been submitted. So, Gabrielle, I'm going to come to you. I'm going to come to you first. Okay. with this question here about photos. Does having a photo on your LinkedIn, on your resume, does that open up discrimination, racism when on the job hunt? Is this something that we should do, or what are your thoughts there?
Such a good question. Such a good question. You increase your chances. I just read this just this week. I believe you increase your chances of making a connection to a recruiter or a hiring manager by 35% if you have a photo. People want to see what you look like. I completely understand the concern on discrimination. Perhaps based on your photo, you may be able to see your religion. You may be judged based on your hair. Nonetheless, I absolutely recommend that you have a photo. Keep in mind, you want people to know what you look like because you want them to accept you. And if they don't, they're not the company for you. So a photo tremendously increases, a LinkedIn photo tremendously increases the chances that a recruiter or a hiring manager will reach out to you.
To come in on this, if you don't mind. So just alone, in the LinkedIn algorithm, if you're a recruiter and you're working it with LinkedIn Recruiter, if you don't have a photo, your profile is not 100% complete. So you'll be rated as a lesser candidate just based on that alone, right? Now, I will say this. I know they asked about photos on resumes as well. I wouldn't suggest it there because there's a great chance that you'll be kicked out of the applicant tracking system because the photo image on your document isn't translating well in the system. So you might not want to do that, but to Gabrielle's point, it's a necessity on LinkedIn. And if you're concerned about discrimination, then maybe that's not the company for you. So those are the answers I have regarding photos.
Yeah, and I want to add something to that. Thank you, Kenneth, so much. I will say that one of the first things you do, anyone does, is Google. When someone is impressed with your resume, they are going to put your name in Google. If you do not have a personal website, branding website, depending on your profession, you may not need it. The recruiter or the hiring manager is looking for additional validation. They're looking for additional info more than this piece of paper. It's great. Your resume sparked their interest. Your resume got them to the point that they said, I want to know more about this candidate. So that number one place traditionally that pops up in a Google search is your LinkedIn.
I love that you both said it might not be the company for you, right? If they're willing to discriminate you based on that, then it might not be the place for you. I love that you both said that. And I also love the passion that you both said that, right? I think that goes back to what we talked about before when it comes to making sure that it's the company for you, right? That's how we find that sense of belonging and we really get something that matters to us and a company that we can get behind. So I love that. And thank you both for your answers there. Next question. Should people with African names use their middle name or a more quote unquote palatable nickname, maybe their initials on a resume or a job application for potential to be disqualified because of their name or stereotypes or anything of that nature?
I'm going to make this really simple. Use your name. Your parents spent a lot of time in giving you that name. Be proud of it. Use it accordingly. I think the same applies. If someone's going to, I guess, not select you because of your name, then are they looking at your resume at all? Like, is that really where you want to be? So definitely use your name.
And if I may jump on that, that's exactly what I was going to say. And then also, though, let me be clear, we also know that we've made progress, but progress still needs to be made. So what good hiring managers are doing is that we're redacting that information. I know that that's something that we're doing. That's why use your name, but have confidence in the company. I know in that work, we're redacting all demographic information. When I bring something to Gabrielle, I want her to look at the background. Right? I want her to look at the background. She doesn't know where Stacey Lewis lives. She doesn't know my name. So again, please use your name, but also know internally in the HR space, we're mindful of the progress is made. And so a lot of organizations are moving to redacting that demographic information. But absolutely be proud of who you are.
You know, I might have set the two of you up there. I knew that you would all want to jump on answering that, right? Because at the end of the day, this goes back to what we were just talking about, right? And finding the company that's right for you, right? And if a company is going to discriminate, is that really a company that you want to be a part of? And we're going back to that. So I love that, and I appreciate you both answering that. Next up. Why do applications ask for addresses? Do companies use your address in a way to quote unquote filter out applicants depending on the area where you live?
So from my standpoint, right? I have a third-party recruitment firm, and it's really kind of important for me to know that for some of my clients, they're only looking at local candidates. So I really kind of need to have an understanding. I don't need your street address, but it would be great to have the city and the state, right? So I think that's important information for us on our side of it. As far as what happens internally at an actual corporation, I'll defer to Stacey because I think she's much more familiar with the inner workings. But for us, we just needed to make sure that you're in the locale that we're searching in.
Kenneth, thank you. Kenneth is correct. But here's one thing I want to say, and I said this earlier. I've been in this game for 35 years. A lot of practices we've had, they've just carried over, right? When you originally did resumes, there was not the internet, there wasn't social media, there wasn't technology, right? So what I want to encourage is for where you live, destination, locality, that's important. But the most important thing is putting your best foot forward, right? And sometimes HR has not done a good enough job in putting candidates at ease. So we get an application and there's no address on there, we're going to move it forward. Again, I tell you, we're starting to redact that information, probably for what Gabrielle wants to talk about, but we're trying to eliminate those barriers that have been there for a very long time with resumes and cover letters and all. We're trying to eliminate that barrier and really put candidates in a place to shine.
And to just piggyback on that, so as a millennial who is all in favor of get the work done, right now, so many companies and so many corporations learned due to COVID that you don't have to be in the office. The traditional way of functioning, the traditional way of working, COVID kind of interrupted that. And we have seen that work is still getting done, progress is still being made. And in some aspects, individuals are more efficient because they may wake up a little bit earlier and they may work a little bit later. With that being said, depending on the role, the industry, the company, I recognize that your address may need to be there. For instance, originally from California, Stacey knows this, California, if you live an hour and away, if you head on 405, it may be a situation to eventually to be at work on time. So depending on the role, depending on the company, your address and proximity to that job may be important. However, if it is something like my industry, marketing, communications, you can be international. And so I work with individuals who are international. Some of my clients are international. We communicate, based on time zones or what have you. Zoom, video, FaceTime has really transformed. So what I will say to that is, depending on industry, depending on the role and the type of job you're looking for, there's things I want to see on your resume. So if I'm hiring and a part of the job responsibilities is your social media, I want to see your social media. And if I don't see it, I'm not looking at your resume anymore. Because you're applying for a job where you do social media. I want to see that you know how to operate social media. So it really depends on the role.
Gabrielle, so I want to jump in, which is why I said we have to do a better job in educating applicants, because there's still, and I know Kenneth is probably doing it, there's just still this notion that you do your resume, it just kind of looks this way. But to your point, we want applicants to, what job are you going after? And tailor your resume appropriately. If you're going to social media, maybe not, but you should really highlight your social media platforms, et cetera. I really like that. And I'm really charging HR to really educate applicants on what they're looking for.
I love that. I also think it's a note here that what we're talking about is social media accounts, right? So if you've never done it before, I highly suggest that you log out of everything and just see what you can Google search on yourself and what comes up. And understand that hiring managers are doing that as well. So take a look and make sure you're putting your best foot forward all the way around. Because I promise you'll see nods from this panel about whether or not we've made decisions bringing in candidates when we've seen things on social media. So it definitely happens. I'm still scrolling through our questions here. We got a lot of questions continuing to come in. Thank you so much. Please continue to submit those. Our next question. Let's see who wants to talk about this one. Very, very interested in this one. Buzzword, code switching. To what extent should applicants be code switching during the interview process? Should applicants be code switching during the hiring process? First one to unmute, I will let you have at this one. I know code switching is a major buzzword these days.
I'll just start.
There it is. Thank you.
So for those who may not be familiar with the term, I'll turn on my professor mode a little bit. Code switching is basically turning off and on, depending who you're talking to make sure they understand you. And there's not such a huge disconnect in terms of culture, if you will. So I do think that you always want to put your best foot forward. And I do think in the interview process, you want to take into consideration this word, the culture of the company you're applying to, and that should sort of somewhat dictate how you talk to that recruiter or that person. So for instance, if I am applying for a job in the music industry, let's say a coordinator or something like that, I want to show that I have a love for music. I want to show that I have a love for the arts. I want to show my interest. So I just think it really depends. However, you should always take into consideration the company that you are applying to based on your research, based on that. Like, it makes me think of, I had a mentee who is Black, African-American. He wore his hair in a really big afro. He's from the Bronx. He is brilliant. And he applied for finance and accounting jobs, and he was getting interviews. He never made it past the first interview. And I said to him, he called me and he said, Gabby, why am I not making it past the first interview? I have an MBA. I graduated with honors. I said, are you walking into Goldman Sachs in your big afro? He's like, yeah. I said, just braid it for me. Braid it. He's like, but I love my afro. I don't wear braids. I wear afro. I said, listen, I need you to know that you are walking to Goldman Sachs where there's perhaps not a lot of Black men there. And so perhaps it's kind of fills into that lane. I will say though, once he started braiding his hair, he got job leads and offers. So that's kind of an example of recognizing the culture that you're dealing with.
Gabrielle, I'm going to jump in on a personal note, and I shared this with you guys earlier. Prior to me sitting in the C-suite, the director ahead of me said, you will not advance if you wear your hair natural or you wear your hair in braids, right? And I see potential, so you need to make a decision. And I have to say, Gabrielle, that was eye-opening to me, because I've always had, we're from California, the blunt cut, the nice press and curl. I mean, That's where I lived my life. And so, but when she said that to me, I was like, oh my gosh, why would she say that? But then I recognized the industry that I was in, right? A male-dominated goods movement industry, not a lot of people who look like me. And so what she was saying to me, and I got the lesson afterward, Kenneth, was you'll get to the chair, make some modifications, right, wrong, or indifferent, right? Make some modifications. And then when you get to the chair, drive the culture to be different. So that's why you're seeing me here today with my hair natural, because I guarantee you 10 years ago, I would have never done this. So to that point, you might have to make some pivots, be authentic. I am not saying be authentic, but I live that myself, right? And I wear it now, and I'm proud.
To that point, I just want to add a little bit about, I know Kenneth has something too. I'll be very quick. That when you're able to get in and then kind of pivot. So I worked in a C-suite position. I worked in a role where no one wore jeans. Well, guess what? I'm in the C-suite. So every Friday, that first Friday, I popped out in some jeans. And people looked at me like, is this girl wearing jeans? I still had some heels on. Yeah, I had a really nice blouse on, but you know what happened? It took a few months, and then you started seeing people wear jeans on Fridays. Now, I was in that position to make that change. And so that's just kind of piggybacking on what Stacey was saying.
Now, you led me right to where I wanted to go with that, because I think, so the importance of diversity and inclusion and belonging at an organization, especially with equity, with the equity lens to that, right? They both found themselves in C-suite opportunities where they were able to be impactful and kind of influence kind of what was happening culturally within an organization. So you got that piece. And then Gabby spoke about her mentee, right? So who's sponsoring some of the people and who's mentoring some of the people that maybe are diverse coming into organizations. And when you can have people like Gabby to kind of steer you through some of the code switching navigation, right? It was a simple thing, but wow, how impactful is that to get that feedback, make the change, and then see the results to that. So those are the things that allow us to have this type of conversation here openly about hiring biases, having people in the C-suite that can drive cultural change. So important.
Cultural change. I love it. I love it. I love that term. And I love the fact that we're talking about it here, right? It's huge. Unfortunately, we're running a little low on time here, so I'm going to make this our last question. And Stacey, I'd like to come to you for an answer here. Would it be wise to decline or prefer not to say when it comes to demographic questions that a company may ask? Sometimes it feels like a trap, right? Sometimes it feels like maybe it's our own insecurities, or maybe it's just an opportunity for a company to discriminate. Talk to us a little bit about that, Stacey, kind of close us out here.
Thank you, James. So typically, I even struggled that with myself when I was in the interview process and interviewing, and I'm in HR, because you do, especially if you come from an underrepresented group, you do think about they're going to use this for, it says we're going to use it to track demographics or data or EEO compliance, but not really sure. Especially to Gabby's point, if you look at the website and nobody looks like you, right? That's the psyche. So what I'm going to say in this is do what you feel is right? We do track that data. We have a whole EEO process that we use here and we do track that data. But I don't want to say there's a right or wrong answer, because I can't tell a person that what they are maybe in the back of their mind feeling is not correct, especially, and I love when Gabby said this, when you're looking around the organization and you don't see representation that looks like you. So initially you will probably say, I don't know why they're asking that question. But conversely, we do capture that data for compliance and reporting purposes. And it should say that on the application. And I know that is how we capture the data. I love for Kenneth and Gabby to really weigh on that. But I want you to do what you feel is right in your heart.
Yeah. What I will say is oftentimes that information is used to help out and for the reporting of diversifying a candidate funnel, right? To increase our underrepresented groups that maybe a company has. So thank you so much. Panelists, thank you so much for all of your answers. If you found this helpful, check out our other Jobcast on indeed.com/Jobcast. You'll see on-demand virtual workshops, all kinds of opportunities where you can see more information. You'll see all of the links as well that you can get information as well. For the latest information on Indeed, please follow us on social media. Thank you again to all three of my panelists. It was so great to have you. I could probably spend another 3 days with you and still have more questions. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your personal stories as well. Thank you to all of our attendees and for your questions and just joining us today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Thanks for watching.